This is this between us.
The number one podcast in the world.
This is
the JBU.Show featuring Austin
from the Miller Talk Podcast.
ALLAN,
The American Sincerist.
and now your host,
Cam Allen.
All right, everyone, welcome to the JBU Miller Talk live show. Today we're back for Chapter 1 of the American Gospel by John Meacham. If you didn't catch the first episode, that was over the introduction. And today we're doing Chapter 1.
There you go.
You got anything to say?
No, I mean, not yet, I don't think.
This is the first time I'm doing the audio recording for this series. So I guess we could talk for a second about the book. I bought it not knowing who the author is or anything about him, really. Basically bought it off of the title, and I read the back, and I thought it sounded interesting. And so just through the introduction, I already didn't really agree with John Meacham on some things. Some things I think I did. I do like his writing style. I think it's very easy to read. And I think he's very historically accurate. So, but I just think he's coming at it through a lens, like a secular lens, whereas I thought that the author was Christian. When I bought it, I didn't do any digging on him. So it seems like he's coming from a secular lens, but it's still an interesting read.
Yeah, I think that's about right. You know, you and I are pretty aligned on this. I would say I agree with him probably about 70% so far. I mean, only like you said, we're only through the introduction as far as the show is concerned. But I think that I don't know. Chapter 1 didn't like it. It's chapter 1, right? So obviously it didn't come to any conclusions, but it seemed like it started going a little bit better of a direction here. He seems to be making some good points that I find hard to disagree with, even though I still feel like there's kind of an underlying push here that we're going to get to of we should have way less religion in government. But so far that's not the case, so I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Yeah, chapter 1 starts off, God and Mammon, fortune, fear in the first colonies. The first quote he provides is from John Winthrop, from A Model of Christian Charity, 1630. For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill, the eyes of all people are upon us. So that if we shall deal falsely with our God, in this work we have undertaken and so caused him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world.
It's an excellent quote and one that's obviously referenced a lot, even today, at least the first part of it, the shining city on a hill. The idea of it, although I think the idea is very poorly captured today. They're not, generally when it's used today, it's more of like a utopic kind of progressive narrative rather than a, model city that is living by God's rule. In fact, God is generally not mentioned at all. Imagine that. But it's an excellent point. Obviously, it stood the test of time, but I'm trying to think of how I want to say this. The The comparison is a little bit weak, I think. And the comparisons that he makes throughout this chapter are a little bit weak. And the reason for that is he spends a lot of time pointing to, and obviously, again, the beginning of the book, obviously we're going to start at the very beginning, but he spends a lot of time pointing to the British colonies rather than early America in this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that, yeah, the context matters because it is the world in which, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and all of them grew up in and were brought into. But there's a reason we left Britain. There's a reason we formed our own nation. And, the leftists love to point to, and I'm not saying Meacham is a leftist necessarily. I haven't figured out what he is yet. But they love to point to that early colonial time and a lot of the things that England was doing, English common law, and ways that the American colonies organized their governments and stuff as examples of why, whatever they're trying to do today is justified. The problem is those are British colonies. Even though they're called the American colonies because they're in America, they were British colonies until 1776. Doesn't matter what they were doing. We left what they were doing for a reason. We fought a war to get away from British rule for a reason. And so I find the comparison sometimes a little dubious. It's just not... It's not as relevant to me as the actual founding period. But let's go through it.
Yeah, the next quote that he shares is from John Milton from the Tenure of Kings and Magistrates, 1649. No man can be so stupid to deny that all men naturally were born free, being the image and resemblance of God himself. I don't think this is where I just don't know about John Meacham. Because I don't think he denies, I don't think he's an atheist. That's what, I don't think that he's an atheist. I think he believes in God. He's just trying to argue that our founding fathers weren't Christian, is what I think he's trying to say, is they all followed God, which was good, but it wasn't exactly Christian. I think that's what he's trying to say throughout this.
He definitely seems like he's very much more, Jeffersonian. And while Jefferson is my man, right? That's my, like people have spirit animals, that's my spirit founder. But I do think this is an area where he was wrong because he was constantly trying to conform the Bible to his beliefs instead of his beliefs to the Bible. And I think that was a mistake on Jefferson's part. Not that he was wrong about necessarily everything that he said in doing so, but I think that he was wrong to try and conform the Bible to his ideals instead of the other way around. And I definitely agree that I think Meacham is doing kind of the same thing, where he's trying to remove, and I don't have a problem with removing established religion out of it because I don't really believe in it. Shouldn't say I don't believe in, but I find many flaws with the established religions, right? I find many flaws with the different denominations of Christianity, but
I didn't see that quote from Jefferson in here, but
what? That he finds many
I don't
flaws
believe
with
in
it.
Established religion.
Well, I don't know if he ever says it outright, but I mean, he wrote his own
but
Bible.
he's pretty against the organized and all that part of it.
Organized is what I meant, not established.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, he wrote his own Bible, so I don't know that we need a quote from him that says he's against organized religion.
Yeah. Anyways.
Let's continue.
The first thing I highlighted was the second paragraph on the page 38, second page of chapter 1.
Okay.
Bradford and his company saw the hand of God in their journey. the God of Israel, who had, in the Christian worldview, redeemed the sins of the world through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In his account of the voyage and of the founding of Plymouth, Bradford suggested his own generation's epitaph. May not and ought not the children of these fathers rightly say, our fathers were Englishmen which came over this great ocean and were ready to perish in this wilderness, but they cried unto the Lord, and he heard their voice.
And why did you highlight that?
Because of mostly of the quote, but just of the it's kind of shows how religious the settlers were and in which way they were religious.
They certainly
when
had
they first came over.
They certainly had a deep belief, and I think that's what Meacham's trying to highlight here is that they were devoutly religious, and I think it also speaks to why. Well, I don't know if it speaks to why, but it definitely illustrates that this feeling that the journey to America, the forming of the country, all of this being, due to divine intervention, it goes right to the beginning. It's something that these people believed that they were witnessing throughout. It's not something that just came out of nowhere. Now, I guess if I was going to be extremely critical of that, I would say that these are just delusional cultists that want to believe that everything is a sign from God. But you got to think of the immense adversity and immense just peril that the people of this time faced. I mean, crossing the ocean from Britain to the Americas, think of just 50-ish years ago, 75 years ago, I'm thinking like 1950 era, or even just 1980s, 1990s, before the internet is a big thing where individuals are able to, on the fly, check facts for themselves about things. The amount of things that we believed that just simply weren't true, the amount of mystery that there was to the world, the amount of very fantastical things like alien spaceships and various things that and I get there's still plenty of people holding on to that fantasy, but the amount of fantastical things that we believed could be possible because we had no way to disprove it, it's almost completely gone these days because of the internet, because people have had the ability to share, okay, why is this not true, and all of that. We're all able to individually check at the moment. We're getting to a much truer world, which is a very messy place right now, but I think ultimately will bring us to a better place. But if you think about just from that time where you had there was this section of your brain that was just willing to believe fantastical things were possible, magic tricks, for example, the belief that it was real magic instead of a magic trick, because you couldn't disprove it. I've just listened to a story recently, and I am completely blanking on the podcast for whatever reason. Somebody might be able to tell us in the comments. But I just listened to World's Greatest Con, and they were talking about this experiment that the government did in the 1970s, trying to determine once and for all if there were actually people capable of doing, I forget exactly what they were trying to do, but magic, for lack of a better word, right? They had hired these people that claimed that they could do stuff with their mind, right? Telekinesis and that sort of thing, move things with their mind or whatever. And as part of that, these two magicians decided to try and fool these researchers into believing that they were actually doing these things. And they had some rules. If anybody ever asked them directly, they were going to be honest and tell them that they were fucking with them the whole time, but they were going to try as hard as they could to make them believe that they were actually doing these things with their mind. And it got to the point that these researchers had like mental breakdowns when they found out that they were being tricked the whole time and this was not actually happening. That's how much people wanted to believe. Scientists even wanted to believe this portion of the world existed that was unexplainable and that crazy things could happen in. And we all kind of had that until very recently. At least I did, and I assume most people did. It now take that all the way back to the 1600s when the average person doesn't have an education. There's certainly no internet. There's no newspaper. Well, there is newspaper in England, I guess, by that time. But you're just starting to get books into mass print and things like that. You know, so self-education is just starting to come about. And then to get on a boat on a 3-month journey across the Atlantic Ocean that just several years prior you thought went off the end of the earth. And the only reason you don't think that is because some guy came back and said, hey, we found land over there, and there is no end of the earth. The amount of, like, I'm not good at painting pictures like this, but just the amount of faith that you have to just get on that boat in the first place and to believe that is incredible. And then to actually make it across that journey where like 90% of people get scurvy and all these diseases because we didn't understand vitamin C deficiency and all of these various things. You know, it's the kind of thing where they literally have to throw people. We're going to find out here in a second because the next paragraph's the one I highlighted. They literally have to throw people overboard if they're dead because everyone else will die if they leave the rotting corpse on the ship. Like, this was a brutal, brutal world to live in. And it's a world where there really is no certainty except for the things you can feel and touch yourself. And so it's, on one hand, understandable why they would want to believe that there is somebody that is guiding all that, right? That is watching over them and making this stuff happen. At the same time, there's no reason to believe it. Because everything you see is just awful all the time, basically. Your life is miserable. Everybody else's life is miserable. I mean, it's such another world to try and explain to a kid today just how amazing your life is if you're dirt poor compared to what it was like 100 years ago. If you were rich. Mm-hmm. If you were rich 100 years ago, it was abject suffering and poverty compared to being dirt poor today. Anyway, sorry, that was a long rant, but... Do you want me to...
Yeah, it's... that journey, it took a lot of faith and just... yeah, you thought the end of the world was that way. Turns out the world doesn't end that way. Oh, you can just go over there to this new place and start a new life. But it's going to be very hard.
Keep sailing and not die somehow.
Mm-hmm. I might have to pull out that old history book, too. Maybe you can throw some segments in. My old, the big colorful one, you know?
Oh,
the children's book.
Yeah.
Read through the early history of America. That might be interesting, but yeah.
Well, then the next paragraph that I highlighted was literally the next paragraph. And it said, God's kindness might be boundless, but the pilgrim's kindness had its limits. En route, one of the hired sailors, a proud and very profane young man, one of the seamen of a lusty, able body, was difficult, sneering at seasick passengers, cursing and swearing, bullying and unsettling. The man frightened the pilgrims so much that Bradford was not unhappy to see him dead. But it pleased God to smite this young man with a grievous disease, of which he died in a desperate manner, and was so himself the first that was thrown overboard. Not exactly Christian to see the death of a man, however filthy-mouthed as a special work of God's providence, to use Bradford's words, but contradiction between profession and practice, between the dictates of faith and man's darker impulses, was to be an enduring theme in the history of the nation, the Pilgrims were helping to found. And it is an interesting contrast. But I also don't know, it's not as if they just disliked this guy so they threw him overboard. It's one thing to take that revenge upon yourself. It's another thing to not be as upset that something bad happened to a bad guy. Like that framing of it, I think, is a little unfair. I think is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
On page 40, he has a picture of a bunch of boats.
I was hoping you'd bring attention to this. Read the quote.
And it says underneath.
Hang on one sec. I can actually put it up on screen this time. Give me just a second to do that before we...
Everybody, this is new breaking technology on the Miller Talk JBU live show.
I know, right? Fucking
We're
magic.
putting it up on screen instead of just in the camera. See, guys, this is what you're used to.
There you go.
Here, momentarily, it will be all new. The world's about to change.
It is on screen, but I guess your viewers can't see it, huh? Hang on.
Okay, sorry, my viewers. Never mind.
No, I should be able to do it. Hang on.
Chris doesn't like you guys as much.
We'll do it this way instead. How do I...
So there we go.
There we go. Okay. So if I go back to my main feed, there we go. All right. Now everybody can see it. Now, what's the quote say? That, as you can see,
The first permanent American Jewish settlers came to New Amsterdam, later New York, fleeing persecution in Brazil in 1654. As much as I love, esteem, and admire the Greeks, John Adams said, I believe the Hebrews have done more to enlighten and civilize the world. Moses did more than all their legislators and philosophers. So this is where the downfall of America began.
So there you have it.
Got their roots
it was
in.
always the Jews.
1654.
As much as I love, esteem, and admire the Greeks, John Adams said, I believe the Hebrews have done more to enlighten and civilize the world. Moses did more than all their legislators and philosophers. That's a hell of a quote.
Mm-hmm. That's
At least
very
for the,
interesting.
The times that we live in currently. Although, to be fair, I think John Adams is the one No, I like Adams. I think it's Hamilton I don't care for that much.
Yeah, Adams is all right. Hamilton's kind of a...
He's the wishy-washy one.
Hit and miss. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not that he's wishy-washy.
I don't know
he
why
was
he
generally...
would attribute that to Moses, and the Hebrews.
What do you mean?
He said that Moses and the Hebrews did more
than the Greeks, yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm just reading it wrong.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. Because the first quote and then he separates it. Yeah. He loves the Greeks, but he believes the Hebrews and Moses did more. So it's an interesting little quote to kind of include to that, because you're like, hey, look, all these Jews came over and this is what John Adams said about it. Or some, obviously he wasn't alive when they came over, but this is what John Adams said about Jews,
Speaking of which, there's a quote from John Adams on, is it this page? Hold on, I guess on this page. Soon after the Reformation, a few people came over into this new world for a conscience sake. Perhaps this apparently trivial incident may transfer the great seat of empire into America. Talk about foreshadowing. Holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
I've never read that quote before, but wow.
Yeah.
And
We were gonna make a movie about America. That's how I'd open it up.
for those wondering, he was that was a comment on the moral contradiction of slavery. But
Yeah, there's a very long paragraph
people,
right before this picture, and it even continues on to page 40 from 39. There was a lot of context missing there to get to that quote, but
sorry if I skipped over too much. Go ahead.
no, I wasn't. I was just letting the viewers know, or listeners, whoever it might be. We would love to sit here and just read the book. Maybe we'd take turns reading pages or something and stopping when something sounds interesting to talk about. But there's this funny thing called copyright laws. We can't do that. So we're kind of highlighting some spots to really kind of help you guys get the idea of the book without having to read the whole thing, and also make some discussion. So,
right.
Yeah, I had just under that highlighted. The first years of the country's history were full of pious pilgrims, dashing gold hunters, ambitious London investors, anxious Jews in flight from persecution in Brazil, intense spiritual seekers guided by an inner light, and stern Puritan politicians intent on building a city of God in the middle of a fallen world. It was an eclectic cast of characters, some in search of God, others on the prowl for mammon, and even those for whom freedom of religion was a driving force soon found themselves doing unto others what had been done unto them.
Just to clarify for anybody unaware, mammon basically just means riches. They were searching for riches. And then as far as the idea, that they would soon find themselves doing unto others what had been done unto them, that is true for some of them. I don't know that as we all know, Jamestown was a massive failure. And that's, in my opinion, primarily because it was British. And I don't mean because it had a British flag. I mean because they were still following their British ways, for lack of a better way to put it. They hadn't yet let go of those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I
assume
Oh, go ahead.
that he's referring to what we did to the Indians.
Well, that too.
And I just don't, just because there's a group of Christians here and a group of Christians here, and this group is for this thing, and this group is for this same thing, but the opposite way, against that thing, therefore, and they both use quotes from the Bible to justify why they're against it and why they're for it, doesn't mean Christianity's bad. It doesn't mean that, because
no, it means that humans
it's
are
the same
flawed.
thing when it's like, oh, the white man enslaved the black people. It's like the white man also freed the black people. So what does it matter if he's white or not?
Well, and if we go a little farther back in history, technically the Muslim enslaved us all.
Yeah. So it's just like they go, well, Christianity was used to justify slavery, and Christianity was also used to abolish slavery. So
yeah, the only thing it
the
proves
devil's
is
a great
that,
deceiver.
yeah, the only thing it proves is that humans are flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And this is literally the point. This is why you have free will. This is everything that the Bible teaches you, which is that it is your job to determine which is more right. It is your job to use your logic and your common sense to determine the correct way to follow God.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you'd be hard-pressed to find a Christian today that says we screwed up in freeing the slaves.
Yeah.
Despite all the other things we can disagree about today, we pretty much all fundamentally agree on that it was an evil that we should have ended, we did end, we're glad we ended it. And it's generally pretty easy to tell when somebody is manipulating the text to perform an evil.
Mm-hmm.
anyone that tells you, you know, I'm doing this because God said so, and whatever they're doing is apparently not righteous, they're probably manipulating the text.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they're doing something to you, I mean, just the fact, or rather the act of doing something to somebody, good or bad. Well, not really good or bad, but just doing something to somebody, period, is kind of antithetical to what the Bible teaches.
Yeah, that's how we ended off the first part of chapter 1. And the next part is laws divine, moral, and martial. The first thing I have highlighted for that section is on page 42.
I think
that big long paragraph.
Real quick,
So,
before you go to that, let's I want to read just a little bit of the very first paragraph just to set it up, what's in this section for the listeners.
Mm-hmm.
The first permanent English settlers arrived in search of gold, not God. The language of the first charter of Virginia was lovely, the sentiments warm, the king's expectations clear. Issuing the document to the Virginia Company of London on Thursday, April 10th, 1606, James, I said, he was happy to bless so noble a work, in the hope that the mission to the New World would carry the, quote, Christian religion to such people as yet live in darkness and miserable ignorance of the true knowledge and worship of God. That whole paragraph is kind of contradictory. Claims they came in search of gold, not God, and then gives us a quote on how they were looking to bring God to the New World.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of contradiction is also, you know, what we've been highlighting all throughout so far. I will say that I had Grok pull the original words of the of that charter, and holy cow, is it like the most? It's exactly what you'd expect. It's exactly what you'd expect for a British charter of this time, because my God, is it just rambling and very pretentious. Pretentious is the word I'm looking for. But the general idea in modern simplified English is more like this. It says here, King James I, by the grace of God, King of England, Scotland, France, and Ireland, defender of the faith. I didn't know that the King of England was ever in charge of France, but I digress. We have received a request from our loyal subjects, Sir Thomas Gates, etc., etc., etc. There's a bunch of other names listed. They ask for our permission to settle and create the colonies in that part of America commonly called Virginia. They want to split into two separate companies, one based in London, the first colony, and one based in Plymouth, Bristol, Exeter, the second colony. The first colony plans to settle between these longitude and latitude, the second between these other longitude and latitude. The two settlements must stay at least 100 miles apart. We strongly approve of this noble plan. It may, with God's help, spread the Christian religion to people who currently live in darkness and ignorance of the true God, and eventually bring the native peoples to civilized society and orderly government. Therefore, we grant as follows. The London group is officially the first colony, the Plymouth group, the second colony. Each colony may choose its exact landing spot. Each colony receives a huge land grant, 50 miles of coastline in each direction from their first settlement, plus all islands within 100 miles offshore, plus 100 miles inland from the coast. They may live there, build forts and towns, and defend themselves. No other English subjects may settle behind them on mainland without written permission from the colony's council. The colonists may take as many willing English subjects as they need, along with ships, weapons, supplies, etc. They have the right to fight off anyone who tries to settle in their territory without permission or who tries to harm the colony. They may stop and tax any ships trading in their waters, 2.5% on English subjects, 5% on foreigners, and for the first 21 years, the money goes to support the colonies. For the first 7 years, they may bring goods from England duty-free. Anyone born in the colonies or their children will have all the same rights and freedoms as if they had been born in England. Smuggling or secretly trading goods outside the colonies will result in forfeiture of the ship and cargo. Piracy or attacks on friendly nations will lead to the loss of royal protection and allow anyone to pursue the offenders. Later, when the colonies ask, we will issue new patents granting the actual land titles to the settlers and in free and common soccage a simple form of ownership rather than feudal service, held from our manor of East Greenwich in Kent. In short, the character is overwhelmingly a business and real estate deal. And Meacham goes on to use this as an example of why they were in search of riches rather than God, but I don't find that to be true from that. While the document written in its actual form is much more pretentious than that, that really is just like setting out some very basic rules. Okay, you guys are going to settle here. You guys are going to settle here. This much area is yours. You have the right to defend it. You have the right to set it up. You can keep the taxes for the first 21 years to get started. Like, there's nothing there that says ulterior motive here. This is just very basic setting up a colony stuff. Like, I think Meacham is stretching by trying to imply that this proves that they're searching for gold rather than, or for riches rather than anything else. It doesn't prove that they're, looking to spread the word of God to the Americas either necessarily, but it doesn't undermine that.
Yeah, I think that really shows why, or the true intentions of the original colonists.
Let's see if there's any further evidence in what you've highlighted here.
Armed with the King's Commission, 3 ships, the Discovery, the Godspeed, and the Susan Constant, with 144 men, led by Captain Christopher Newport, left London in December 1606. They reached the banks of the James River in May 1607, just 13 months after the charter was issued. They knew about the 98 words referring to God and built a makeshift chapel for morning and evening prayer and 2 services on Sunday. Before long, the colony's minister died, and Captain John Smith recalled that it took 2 or 3 years before more preachers came, a sign. Smith thought that God had most mercifully heard us. On the whole, however, evidence of God's care was scanty. Within weeks of the Jamestown landing, Indians attacked, killing 2 and wounding 10. Smith went on an expedition, was captured and saved from execution only. He believed by the intervention of the chief's daughter, Pocahontas. When Smith returned to the settlement, he found only a third of the original company still alive. Things were at their bleakest. So we said there was no evidence of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then said Smith was saved by the chief's daughter from execution.
Yeah. And while he's basically saying, well, they faced troubles, therefore God wasn't around.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not how that works. The fact that they weren't all murdered immediately in and of itself is a miracle. They had no, it was just them. There was nobody else.
Just because times were at their bleakest doesn't mean that God was absent from any work. They just landed in a new area, unconquered by civilization. The Indians didn't have buildings. They had tents they hauled around with them. They were nomads. They weren't building civilization.
Right. Well, and he's conflating 2 things here too, which is that the point of the king sending out and allowing these people to go and set up these colonies is because he's trying to expand the empire of Britain, right? It is because he's looking to bring in new resources, gold, copper, silver, whatever. But that's not necessarily the intent and goal of the settlers themselves, and it's not necessarily the exclusive intent of the King of England. I find in the next paragraph, though, I find this quote kind of funny. Obviously, it's not funny, but it's kind of funny in this context. He said, word of the colony's dismal beginning soon reached London. Instead of taking delivery of gold, silver, and copper, the officers of the Virginia Company and King James were hearing of starvation and slaughter. He told all who would listen that America was a misery, a ruin, a death, and a hell. And then in June 1609, that's when Thomas Gates, he was sent from England by the king to bring order to the chaos with instructions whose title left little doubt as to their content. Laws divine, moral, and martial. So he was supposed to come in and resurrect these struggling colonies for the king.
We can see where he got the title for this section too.
Hey, look at that. 2 for 1.
Yeah. That's what I remember it talking about. Because this is mostly going over basically England's history in America. There was obviously other countries that were coming over here. I mean, Christopher Columbus came from Italy, right? Or
he came from
Spain, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same difference.
So the first Spaniards that came over here came to like Louisiana, right? Or Florida and Georgia?
Florida first, yeah.
Yeah. And so they were also, weren't they Catholic? Or the Italians were Catholic?
No, I think, yeah, the Spanish were Catholic. That's why Mexico's so Catholic.
Yeah. Yep. That is right. So, but yeah, they came over too with just the same. They were well-to-do people who thought that they could make. They started growing tobacco. That was America's real first industry, was tobacco growing. And so they came over here and was in the same boat. They were like, wow, there's a lot of surviving that has to happen around here.
Yeah, and so after the kind of failures of the original 2 colonies, as we just read, the king sent Gates over to kind of lay down the law and get things back in order. And it says, for Gates immediately imposed a martial law, a new code rife with ecclesiastical requirements and penalties for those who fell short of stringent religious rules. The laws divine, moral, and martial were severe, legislating religious observance upon pain of death. Those who failed to come to services twice daily would first lose their food for the day. A second offense brought a whipping, and a third, 6 months in the gallows. To break the Sabbath by any gaming, public or private, or to miss church on Sunday was the third offense, a capital crime. The next part is the best part. Sex was of particular interest. Sodomy, incest, rape, and adultery carried the death penalty, though fornication led only to several whippings and compulsory begging for forgiveness. To disobey the governor or his lieutenants led to whippings and required public confession on one's knees during Sabbath services. In short order, the first enduring English settlement had become not an outpost of freedom or an inspired missionary base, but a new world stage on which the old world imposed its most suffocating and absolutist tactics. So again, this is really a stretch to me, because for one, we're still dealing with the English. So it's no surprise that they're following the English laws. That's what they set out to do, essentially, was to expand the territory of England. And this is after, famine and slaughter and suffering. They're trying to crack down, and I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying that the logic behind it is somewhat understood. He's coming to crack down in order to save their life, not to be unduly punitive. And while he obviously did so in a very misguided way, I don't see how this has any forbearance on... I mean, I guess it does in a sense where you could say the founders and maybe this is how he'll tie it together later to be fair to him, but you could say the founders, knowing that this stuff happened, came up with their perspective because of this, and fine, so be it. I don't think any of us think that, cracking down on this kind of religious extremism, how we title it today, led to much benefit for the colonies. I don't see. Then again, maybe it did. I don't know. I don't know. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think for the time, you can understand why. That doesn't mean it's justified by any means, but
Right.
understand why they would do things like that. The community has to stay together and be working towards the same goals. And
Survive.
so, yeah. It was not easy out there. You got one or two guys making too much of a ruckus. I mean, you got to get rid of them.
Well, and he says, Almighty God, writing of the sea venture, William Strachey spoke wonderingly of the mercies of the Almighty God who had delivered them. Yet, they were turning their promised land into a place that used force to control its subjects in realms both temporal and spiritual. It was hardly an auspicious beginning, hardly what Lincoln would later call a new birth of freedom. But nobody ever promised freedom. The British never promised freedom. Like, that wasn't the British's goal. That was America's goal later.
Yeah, that's what they didn't leave Britain in the 1600s, wherever, and say, we're going to start America. Would you give us this right, Sir King James?
Please, sir.
They didn't say that. They came over here in just looks of new opportunities, but they were still Englishmen. If you could get in a time machine and go back and ask them, are you an Englishman or an American? They would say, the fuck's an American,
A fucking what? So he's not wrong that, they absolutely cracked down hard, and they absolutely were religious extremists, for lack of a better way to put it, during this time in the Americas. But there's also, it's also really hard to say that if they hadn't done that, that they would have survived. Because this is one of those situations where if everyone is not working fervently for the goal, there's a reason the military doesn't have a lot of freedom. And this is essentially a military venture, even though these are not military individuals. They maybe didn't realize it at the time. When they first sent the boats, they maybe didn't realize this was going to have to be a military adventure. But that ultimately is what it becomes. They're getting attacked by Indians. They're in a place with no real support or logistics support, for lack of a better way to put it. It's 13 months apparently. I thought it was only 3 months. It's 13 months to get across the Atlantic to the United States. That's insane. Can you imagine having to put in your order for whatever you need 13 months in advance? I can't. I can barely plan a week in advance. So there's no. The point is, there's no. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
After that, he starts taking a dive into slavery. Not in the next paragraph, but the next paragraph after that, still on page 44. The African diaspora and its religious and cultural implications for the faiths and customs of those brought here in bondage is a largely overlooked story in American history. Some slaves were Muslims, and they struggled to keep their faith. Many others practiced native African religions despite aggressive and successful Christian evangelicism within slave communities. Do you believe that was a problem?
Do I believe
that the slaves weren't allowed to practice whatever religion they wanted?
I mean, do I agree with it from my modern American perspective? No. Do I think that it's hardly, like, do I think that it's shocking in any way that the British were not allowing them? No. Like, slavery was wrong. They should have never had them captive in the first place. The fact they didn't let them practice the religion is hardly worse than that. Like, that's just part and parcel to them being slaves. And at the same time, I would still I would still say that here
Slay Queen.
fuck off. I would still say here in modern America that while they would absolutely be free to practice their religion, it still could not contradict the laws of our land. They still could not, practice in a way that affects the constitutional rights of others. I particularly take offense to the quote that he pulls on page 45 from John Butler.
Mm-hmm.
White
I have
Americans
that highlighted too.
Carried out an African spiritual holocaust. Okay, first of all, again, not white Americans, white British.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, we can just call them British, because that's what they are. And an African spiritual holocaust. Look, maybe we can stretch and say that's true, right? But putting the word holocaust and then spiritual before it, they're not comparable.
I think holocaust is just an unnecessary word.
Yeah.
There.
What did they unfairly? Did they treat them unfairly and prevent them from practicing the religion as they pleased? Yes. Can I compare that to a Holocaust where people are murdered for no reason in the most grotesque ways? Not at all.
This might be dumb, but that's like saying
it's oppression, but not a Holocaust.
If we cured cancer, the doctor caused a Holocaust on the cancer.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of a good thing that it happened, so let's not use such a charged word like Holocaust.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, it's an intentional misframing, or it's an intentional framing to maximize the impact in a way that is wholly unnecessary. We fought a war to end slavery for a reason. We already disagree with it. We don't need to exaggerate it. It already is enough. And the problem is, with all of this exaggeration that people have done, it now means less than ever. The word racist means less than ever. The word rape means less than ever. Because everybody uses these exaggerations incessantly to the point that they eventually mean nothing. The word slavery, the word bondage, the N-word. All of which mean virtually nothing anymore. Anyway. Kind of a side.
Yeah, I had the next paragraph highlighted, but it continues to the next page, so I pretty much only have what's on this page. And then there's another picture. So another tragedy, the criminal treatment of Native Americans. See, here we get to the Native American part.
Yes.
Was born in and played out in both the South and the North, and it too had a religious cast. The Virginia Company was to consider the Christianization of the Native Americans as the most pious and noble end of this plantation. And Massachusetts looked to win and incite the natives to the only true God and Savior of mankind. I mean, I guess from like a secular perspective, that sounds like the worst thing ever. But from a Christian perspective, I'm like, okay, I don't mind that they Christianized the Native Americans.
No, and it literally says win
and
and
it wasn't
incite the
just so,
natives, meaning convince, not force.
Mm-hmm. We talked to a lady a long time ago. I don't know if you want me to mention her or not, about the boarding schools, the native or the Christian.
Go ahead. Dr.
They were. It wasn't just Dr. Widowson.
Yeah, Widowson.
They weren't just making these schools to teach the Indians about Christianity. It was more like civilizing them.
In a sense.
Because you're talking about people coming from over here that know how to live, prevent disease.
In a modern society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are things the Native Americans had no idea. So they were teaching them how to be better people. And also, hey, don't forget that, like, you know, God exists and all this other stuff. They were basically just teaching them the way that we're taught. You know that when you scrape your knee, you put some peroxide on it or wash it, put a bandage on it, and that way it doesn't get infected. So
yeah, they were, I mean, really what they were doing was sharing cultures with each other. We also learned things from the natives too.
Yeah.
The fact is they were many millennia behind us in advancements. So they had a lot more to learn from us than us from them. They didn't use the wheel. They hadn't domesticated horses, even though there were many of them in the Americas. They, like, the fact that things were learned more one way than the other is not, and this is the thing too, is the idea is, well, we just came over here and forced all this stuff on them and we could have just left them alone and they'd have been fine. No, what would have happened was if the English didn't come over and force this stuff on them, then the fucking Russians or the Chinese or whoever else sent out a boat next would have come over here. And you think they would have been fucking nicer? You think Genghis Khan was going to come over here and make nice with the fucking natives? This fantasy world that people live in, first of all, we can't change what happened. It happened. It is. That's it. But the idea that the English are somehow extra fucking wrong because they got here first, and technically it was Spanish, but as far as dealing with the natives in this context, it was the English first. It's not as if they gave him a choice. Meacham says on page 46, the great distinguishing feature of English relations with Indian groups was replacement of the Indians on the land by white settlers, not conversion or assimilation. That's absolute bullshit. That's a quote from Francis Paul Prucha that he included. That's absolute bullshit. They assimilated and traded and worked with any natives that worked with them. The problem is most of the natives attacked them from the moment they got there. You can't negotiate with people that are trying to fucking kill you. It wasn't that the fucking English landed and went and searched natives and started attacking them. That didn't happen. It was the other way around. The English landed, set up a little temporary home, and then started getting attacked by these fucking random savages. What are they supposed to do?
Yeah, that's basically the point I was going to make.
Sorry.
They were fairly peaceful with the ones that were peaceful with them. We have stories of literally, you know, the picture here, the first Thanksgiving.
I got it.
We traded with them. We did, but then some of them were not so peaceful and didn't like us so much, and so we had to fight and kill them. They did not come over here, like you said, on a bounty mission to see how many Indians they could kill. They came here to try and live. And so happened to run into, there's the picture, everyone. They just came over here to settle and make a new colony. And as long as, you know, you didn't mess with them, then they weren't going to mess with you.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we can condemn them for coming over here to this land that wasn't theirs, but again, okay, fine, it wasn't the.
But then again,
Spanish,
like we said, the
wasn't
Indians
the
weren't
English.
like developing it. They came over here, started farming, building buildings, you know, transforming the environment. The Indians were still running around just like running buffalo off of cliffs.
Well, and the other thing is why were they here? Because they came here and started settling it.
Yeah, at some other time.
Yeah, and
that may have been thousands
of
of years ago. Who knows? But like,
yeah, it was maybe several hundred years before. But does that make it more justified? This is the way the world worked at the time.
Yeah, they had several hundred years to do something with this land, and they didn't. So sorry, we're here. We're doing something with it, and look what we did. 250 years, and we're running the fucking world. So.
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely incredible, and the way that he frames this portion of the book is
yeah, and that's how he
unfortunate.
finishes off that section. So the next section starts on page 46, called "The Wrath of the Devil," and I pretty much highlighted this first quote he has. That continues over to page 47. But is there anything you wanted to say about this section?
Hang on.
Or did you have anything particular?
Hang on just one second here. Are you talking about the new section or the last section before we move on?
Well, either. I mean, I feel like we
I'm good on the last
wrapped
section.
up that last section, but if you had anything else to say before we moved on, then that's fine. But if you're ready to move on, then did you have anything to talk about the next section?
Well, right off the bat, you know, the very first sentence I take the same issue with, but most Americans do not want to think about that Dutch ship and its human cargo, nor about the failure to treat the native population justly. Okay. We treated the native population more justly than any other contact between two unknown nations or peoples in all of history prior. So fuck off with that. And most Americans do not want to think much about the Dutch ship and its human cargo. We literally have never stopped talking about it. Not once for 1 second. How much more can we possibly think about it? I really don't like. I really don't like the framing that he's setting up here, that these were a bunch of hypocrites that just came over to dominate and control. And that's fucking nonsense. They didn't know any better than anybody else. They had a more advanced society, but they didn't know any better than anybody else. And again, they land here and start getting attacked. What are you supposed to do? Okay, well, I guess we'll leave. Okay, then American is never invented. And this becomes part of China or part of Russia or part of India or part of whoever else comes next. Is that better? Is that a better world history? Because in reality, if the China of that era or the Russia of that era or the India of that era or the whoever landed here next, they probably would have just literally holocausted every Native American. Because that's what empires did. The settlers, English or later American, from Britain, were different. And they were very different. And the failure not just to recognize that, but to then paint the picture that they were worse than everybody else, it almost makes me want to discredit the rest of the book. Because you're starting from a bad premise. You're starting from a falsified premise.
Yeah. Yeah. So he pretty much opens up with a quote from John Winthrop's A Model of Christian Charity. that was a sermon. Now the only way to avoid this shipwreck and to provide for our posterity is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God. We must be knit together in this work as one man. We must entertain each other in brotherly affection. We must delight in each other, make others' condition our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor, and suffer together. For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world. We shall shame the faces of many of God's worthy servants and cause their prayers to be turned into curses upon us.
So far, that hasn't happened.
So that's basically the biggest, or the expanded version of the quote from the very beginning of the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So what were you saying?
It would seem that since we, at least thus far, are not, a byword in the chapter of the history of the world, rather, it would seem that we might be doing okay with that. The comparison is not what would the perfect do versus what they did. Comparison is what did they do compared to what the norm was at the time.
Exactly.
Humans have never been perfect, and we still aren't perfect, but we have continually gotten better almost exclusively because of the principles and founding of the United States of America since it's been around. Almost exclusively because Europe, prior to that. There is no other country that has contributed to the world this overwhelming ability to sway others into doing and interacting in a good manner than the West, than the United States of America and Europe before that. And there are many flaws, there are many hypocritical moments, there are many fuck-ups along the way. But every step of the way, it is far more advanced in doing so than anywhere else in the world at the time. And that's what we're comparing with, not how close are they to perfect, because we've never obtained perfect. So why would we compare ourselves to it? I mean, we should always compare ourselves to it and try to get closer to it, obviously, but what I mean is as far as judging it, we wouldn't compare it to perfect. We would compare it to the best at the time. Hey.
Yeah, exactly. These guys messed up in some spots, so that just means we need to throw the whole baby out the bathwater. Right? The allusion to the Sermon on the Mount, which that's what I did think about through reading that, but that we are a city upon a hill is one of the most off-cited images of the United States as a kind of promised land that the early New England settlers, playing the part of the ancient Israelites, reached after an exodus of peril and crisis. I mean, that's how it kind of started, as a, say, on a hill, and with he said it, the allusion to the Sermon on the Mount, that we are a city upon a hill, I think that points to the settlers being fairly Christian, if this is the type of imagery they're using in,
Well, it's what he goes on to say, though, that I think is what should be underscored here. He says, Winthrop's text is frequently used as a source of reassurance about our exceptional national destiny. Yet we should not be so quick to think that an ancient phrase of his can help us smooth over the rougher passages of our history, or that telling ourselves we are a special people entitles the country or any element within it to impose its will on others under the cloak of divine sanction. I don't think that that's what we've done, is it? I mean,
No.
I've certainly never thought of it that way.
I don't think anyone's smoothed over any of the bad parts of our history.
No, again, we seemingly recycle them, and for lack of, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but recycle them every single fucking day.
Mm-hmm.
You think China talks about Tiananmen Square every day? You think they talk about their evils and their history every single day? I guarantee that if you do talk about it, you end up in jail. This is the only country where you can talk about the evils of this country before. He even says, he goes on later to say, by the standards of his own day, Winthrop was more moderate than most, but he was engaged in a very particular enterprise, the construction of a Christian commonwealth. Winthrop was no blithe optimist. He understood that the powers of darkness were often more formidable than the forces of light, and like the prophets of old, he thought that God's favor could be withdrawn at any time. His God, like Israel's, was an attentive actor. Man is a morally responsible agent. Winthrop believed and will be called to account for what he does and leaves undone. Yet we should just condemn everything that he and the rest of them did because you morally disagree with it now.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting how many jabs he takes, I guess. He's like, oh, you were so Christian, but 12% of the population was unwed mothers, and like, oh, such a Christian society, they weren't perfect, you know. It almost seems like he's beefing with Winthrop a little bit, you know.
Yeah, kinda. It certainly feels like he's criticizing him.
Because later on, page 48, he says, early in the Arbella sermon, Winthrop says, there are two rules by which we are to walk, one towards another, justice and mercy. Winthrop was less interested, however, in being just and merciful to the extent of complete religious liberty. Having fled European conformity, the Puritans sought conformity of their own. The irony was not lost on the old world. Every party cries out for liberty and toleration, said the Lord Bishop of Salisbury, till they get to be uppermost, and then will allow none.
Sure, that's true. But, well, it's not entirely true since we've managed to do it in America, but I think we skipped over an important sentence before that paragraph too, which is the distance between a culture informed by religiously inspired values but governed by civil institutions that respect personal liberties to a kind of theological totalitarianism is a short one. And then he goes on to talk about that quote of Winthrop's and the Lord Bishop of Salisbury. It's just, I don't know. I'm not sure there's anything else I can say that I haven't already said on this.
Yeah. He ends up closing off that section.
We're going to talk about Anne Hutchinson.
Yeah, I'm looking through this last paragraph. If there's anything worth talking about. I didn't highlight anything, but I guess not much. So, Anne Hutchinson's exile. Pretty interesting one. The case of Anne Hutchinson was a dark hour for Winthrop in Massachusetts Bay. A devoted Puritan, Mrs. Hutchinson came to the colony in 1634 with her husband, William, and 11 children. Conversant with the Bible, she became a popular religious figure, arguing in favor of the doctrine of salvation by faith, not works, or obedience to temporal laws. The Puritan leadership thought her an antinomian, someone who rejected the power of the clergy or of the religious authorities. By the autumn of 1637, she was on trial for heresy. In a showdown with Winthrop and others, Mrs. Hutchinson largely held her own, but eventually snapped. Winthrop recalled and informed the court that God had told her he would ruin us and our posterity and the whole state to punish them for persecuting her.
Interesting.
I mean, for someone that was a devoted Puritan and conversant with the Bible, you should know that you should be glad in persecution. In Matthew chapter 5, but maybe 4. I mean, she was just a rebel to the, what did it say? The religious authorities. Rejected the power of the clergy or of religious authorities. And they banished her.
Yeah.
After she stood trial.
They didn't exactly hang her in the town square or throw her, with cement shoes into the river like a witch. They banished her. And this is after there's kind of some establishment. There's other places for her to go. They didn't just banish her to the wilderness with the Indians. Which I feel is worth noting. Here's the photo of her standing trial.
Oh, yeah. Yep. There you go, guys. The picture of her standing trial in Massachusetts Bay Colony.
1637.
Yep. She was forced into exile and was ultimately killed by Indians.
Much later. Much later. Because it goes on a little bit to say that her condemning the posterity in the whole state was more than enough for Winthrop. She had to go. She said she wants to know why she's banished. Winthrop said no, say no more. The court knows wherefore and is satisfied. But it says Winthrop remained fascinated by Hutchinson. 10 months after her sentencing to banishment, she suffered a terrible miscarriage, what Winthrop called, quote, a monstrous birth. On first hearing of it, Winthrop wrote Dr. John Clark, a physician and preacher in Rhode Island, asking for details. Clark described seeing innumerable distinct bodies in the form of a globe, not much unlike the swims of some fish, confusedly knit together by so many strings, which I conceive were the beginning of veins and nerves. Anxious to learn more, even after reading this lugubrious, I have no idea how to pronounce that, account of the lost fetus, Winthrop spoke with Clark, who added still further clinical details.
I marked that out and put baby.
Okay. 4 years later, after her husband's death, Miss Hutchinson moved from Rhode Island to what is now the Bronx in New York. There, in September 1643, she and the family had with her were massacred by Indians.
Yep. So that was
she went on to live
later.
Life and then was massacred in the way that many others were. The banishment did not, it did not lead to her massacre in any way necessarily, any specific way necessarily. I just wanted to point that out because he kind of makes it sound like it did, but it didn't.
Yeah, that's a pretty short section, and I think we kind of covered that.
It's
not really much else to say.
Well, yeah, we'll just say he's just highlighting Winthrop's religious intolerance, right? She dissented from the religious views, so she had no religious freedom. That was pretty well established. He was very hardcore on making sure that people followed the religious rules of the colony at the time. And remember, these people lived under constant warfare. It's not a justification. It's just what it was. And he doesn't really highlight that at all. I mean, he talks about, her being murdered by Indians, and he talks about them being attacked and massacred and stuff, but he doesn't highlight the fact that these are the conditions in which they were living in which Winthrop imposed these rules. It wasn't like he just did it for fun. Anyhow.
The next section is also fairly short, only 2 pages. Catholics, Quakers, and Devils.
Yeah.
Ooh. Spooky music. The middle of the 17th century brought hope in fear. In Maryland, founded by a powerful Catholic family, the legislature passed the Religious Toleration Act in 1649 to protect all Trinitarian Christians. Not exactly the most liberal policy, but it did benefit Catholics in what was already a predominantly Protestant culture. The next year, the term Quaker was coined in England. So
he goes on at the end of the paragraph to say, facing persecution from every quarter, the Quakers found a welcome champion in William Penn, a rich Englishman who, with others, received a royal charter for what would become Pennsylvania in 1681. The author of the eloquent 1670, quote, The Great Case of Liberty of Conscience, Penn said Pennsylvania was to be a holy experiment in religious and civil freedom, a land to the west and the south of New England in which Quakers and others could live in peace and goodwill, and it largely worked, at least in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's where Franklin spent a lot of his time. The Quakers, I don't think they were too bad. They were kind of against taxes and
it was basically
things like that.
And that's what this section is about. It's about Pennsylvania being set up as this religious and liberal society compared to the British colonies at the time. And it was. I mean, there's a reason why America was founded out of Pennsylvania. This is where the Constitution and the Declaration were written. There's a reason why these ideas came from here. And so he's not wrong in the overarching sense that, yes, a lot of these religious hypocrisies and crackdowns of the early colonies are some of the things that the founders were rebelling against. That's absolutely true. What I think he is wrong about is the overwhelming attempt to morally condemn all of it wholesale. And that's the sense that I got from it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that wasn't his intent, but that's what I got from it. He says, to the north, the news was worse. Connecticut's Code of 1650 was a brutal one. If any man shall have or worship any god but the Lord God, he shall be put to death. And so he's comparing, the other colonies to Pennsylvania at the time. And again, he's right. I don't know that there's a whole lot more to say to this, that Pennsylvania was the way forward and ultimately the way forward for America. Great.
Noon Tavern in Philadelphia is where the Marine Corps was founded.
Oh, yeah.
He talks some more in chapter 2 about some of that stuff. But as far as this, he then begins to talk about
Hold
where is
on.
it? Cotton Mather. What?
I want to read this quote real quick from the end of that paragraph.
Okay.
This is from The Wonders of the Invisible World by Mather. Observation, as well as historical and theological, upon in the nature, the number, and the operations of the devils, capture the apocalyptic spirit of the age. If you do not, by a speedy and thorough conversion to God, escape the wrath of the devil, you will yourselves go down where the devil is to be, not for a short time, but world without end. Not for a short time, but infinite millions of ages. Conversion and conformity. These were the answers for such preachers. The alternative was hell without end. I mean, technically that is what the Bible teaches us.
Yeah.
But there is a difference between forcing conformity and asking for it, I guess.
The reason why he brought Cotton Mather up was because of his critical role that he played in the Salem witch trials.
Yes.
And then after we finish that section, we of course come back to a wall of separation, as this is titled. And so we're back to talking about the separation. I didn't really highlight much through this section, so we got...
To be clear, the wall of separation that he's discussing in this section is not the wall of separation of church and state. He's referring to whose quote is this? Williams' quote. A hedge or wall of separation between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world. He says, note that Williams was not planting a hedge or building a wall to protect the state, but rather religion, believing that the ambitions and vices of men could pervert the church, turning faith into a means of temporal power.
And what's wrong with that? With thinking that it's possible someone could use the faith for, wrong.
Well, what he's pointing to is the fact, he goes on to say it later, Williams' goal, quote, was not freedom of thought for its own sake. He did not think that one way of seeking God was as good as another. What he's pointing to here is Williams' argument for religious freedom, which I agree with him on. That by trying to impose what the correct way to be a Christian is from the top down, you're inevitably going to corrupt it, basically. And you have to let people come to it on their own. Again, I mean, that's kind of the whole idea of this country. He wanted freedom because it was the only way
some
to
of
reach
them
the
did
true
force
God.
people to be Christians. So, some of them did that.
The British, yeah. To Williams.
All right.
So he ends with a quote.
I just noticed I wasn't live on Twitch. Now that we're an hour and a half in, so I'm live on Twitch now.
He ends with the quote from Williams: "The gardens of Christ churches turned into the wilderness of national religion, and the world under Constantine's dominion to the most unchristian Christendom."
Where was that?
That's page 54.
Okay.
It's in the last paragraph on the page there. For such opinions, Williams was exiled from Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1635-36 and spent the rest of his embattled life working to found and secure Rhode Island. It was not easy. Winthrop watched the experiment with care. At Providence, also the devil was not idle, Winthrop wrote of William's colony, describing controversies like a wife beating husband's anger at Williams when the minister tried to protect the wife. And yet, the views on religious freedom Williams articulated until his death in 1683, or possibly 84, we don't know, gradually moved to the mainstream. What changed? Roughly put, it was a combination of the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and American political reality. Fair enough. Despite I don't understand what it is about certain words. I know how to say it, but when I try to read it, I can't say it.
Mm-hmm.
Despite Anglican, Puritan, and separatist experiments with recreating absolutist churches or communities, the general trend after the European break with Rome created a culture of dissent within Christianity that grew down the centuries, and the occasional excesses of places like Jamestown and Massachusetts Bay fueled the colonists' desire for religious liberty. And that's true. That's absolutely true. And maybe a little bit earlier, I was being a little bit unfair to Meacham in tying this together later, but I think we could probably, unless you have something else you want to say in that section, I think we could probably skip down to lessons for the founders.
Yeah, I saw a short part I wanted to mention, but I lost it.
Ah, damn. Shout out to Patrice, at Patrice Montpetit, or at Patrice NM, for sharing the show. We appreciate that.
Yeah, we can move on.
All right.
To lessons for the founders. Pretty short paragraph he starts off with, so I'm just going to read that. Studying the stories of Massachusetts, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, the young men about to construct a new nation detected a consistent theme. Civil societies dominated by compulsory religious rigidity were unhappy and intolerant, while religious liberty seemed to produce more prosperous, stable, and popular cultures.
Absolutely.
I mean, just because something's popular doesn't mean it's the right way to do it, but
That's also
I understand
true.
what he's saying.
Well, and it's worth noting here, overall, coming to the conclusion of this chapter, which we're getting to here, I do mostly agree with Meacham on his conclusion, but it is worth noting while he's highlighting two or three specific examples of the overreach of the Church of England here in the Americas. One, the context matters, like I discussed earlier, as far as, these were people that were living essentially a military life, even though they were not military. And two, there is a lot more to this, right? While this was going on in Massachusetts, while he was focusing on Winthrop heavily in Massachusetts, there were still colonies in New York, and there were still colonies in Pennsylvania and Rhode Island and all these other places that were happening. So it's not as if it was all this extreme rigidity. Now, they are failures that are worth recognizing and pointing out, absolutely. But he paints a little bit narrow of a picture here, I think, to get to the ultimate point.
Mm-hmm.
He's cherry picking a little bit, to put that simply.
He is. The next thing I had highlighted was further down the second paragraph of this section. Foreigners have been encouraged to settle among you. Industry and virtue have been promoted by mutual emulation and mutual inspection. commerce and the arts have flourished, and I can not help attributing those continual exertions of genius which appear among you in the inspiration of liberty. Religious bondage shackles and debilitates the mind and unfits it for every noble enterprise and every expanded prospect.
That was James Madison.
Yes, James Madison.
I, of course, highlighted the next paragraph. Jefferson found Virginia and Massachusetts wanting. They cast their eyes on these new countries as asylums of civil and religious freedom, but they found them free only for the reigning legious freedom. Let me start over. They cast their eyes on these new countries as asylums of civil and religious freedom, but they found them free only for the reigning sect. Jefferson noted of early settlers. I crossed the two sentences. He knew of New England's history of applying the death penalty for religious offenses and regretted Virginia's persecution of the Presbyterians, Quakers, and others.
You're keeping the knackers, bro.
He says the 1774.
Sorry, guys. I've been having some allergies. I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning. I've been coughing and stuff a lot, but
you asshole. The 1774 Massachusetts resolution calling for a continental congress noted the colonists' need for the recovery and establishment of their just rights and liberties, civil and religious. When Jefferson, in writing his notes on the state of Virginia in 1781 and 82, the book was first published in a private edition in 85 and came to query, what would that be, 27. No, that's not 27. 17. What I said. His mind turned to the early days of Jamestown. The question, what of religion in Virginia, led him to a cold-eyed report on his state's underwhelming record of liberty of conscience.
Yeah, that's a pretty long paragraph.
Yeah, it goes on and on.
Continues on to the next page and finishes off this section. I guess he has a kind of argument because it was partially the settlers and colonists began rebelling, obviously, against the British government. And so partially they were rebelling against the British Church, the Church of England. And so it could, I guess, could make an argument that they were rebelling against Christianity, but I think moreover, they had more problems with the way that the Church of England was using the church to inflict political power
it was
and will.
Imposing it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that this fits entirely, but I have to read this quote from Jefferson because I like it.
All right.
A father's right to the custody of his own children, being founded in law on his right of guardianship, this being taken away, they may of course be severed from him and put by authority of a court into more orthodox hands. It was the most unnatural and perverse of laws, Jefferson said. It was nothing less than religious slavery. Little wonder then, he added, that 2/3 of the people had become dissenters at the commencement of the present resolution. Highlighting, because we skipped over a bunch there, highlighting just how kind of absurd the church had become. We're literally taking, I mean, this is akin to what's happening today, not under the guise of the church, but under the guise of liberal wokeism, I guess, where they're taking trans kids away from parents because they're not transing them. Like, is it any better because they were trying to force them into religion? I don't think so. I believe, obviously that following God's word is is paramount. But I certainly don't believe in the state forcing it. I don't believe in the state taking away children to force it. And what Canada did, to go back to what we were talking about earlier when we spoke with Dr. Widowson, what Canada did in taking the Native children and putting them in these schools, I don't really agree with that. Now, it wasn't nearly as forceful as it's made out to be today. It was a kind of mutual thing in order to bring the two societies together, because prior to that, you had natives living in camps near the English settlement camps and the French settlement camps, and they were kind of, conversing and trading a little bit and stuff, but there was two separate societies, and it was an attempt to bring the two societies together. That I agree with. But the compulsory aspect of it, I don't agree with. And it's the same thing here. All of that should be available, I think, and provided, and nobody should be forced to use it, I guess is the best way to put it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that closes out that section. And then we move on to the most important section. Judaism settles in America. We brought Candace Owens on to speak on this for us.
She'll now go off on the next hour about how Charlie Kirk was murdered by his wife. And Donald Trump helped her do it. In fact, I think Donald Trump was the one holding the rifle, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think it was. In the middle of the first paragraph of this section, which is a very long first paragraph, but it says the Jews, ... would nearly all like to remain here. He wrote home to Amsterdam, but he said that the deceitful race, such hateful enemies and blasphemous of the name of Christ, be not allowed further to infect and trouble this new colony. Stuyvesant's superiors at the Dutch West India Company disagreed, directing him to allow the settlers to travel, trade, live, and remain in the colony, provided the poor among them shall not become a burden to the company or to the community, but be supported by their own nation. I feel like we should live by that quote more often in America, but it seems even people back then were anti-Semitic. Isn't that crazy?
It is interesting, that's for sure.
But I mean, I don't really disagree with the deceitful race, such hateful enemies and blasphemous of the name of Christ. I mean, it's just true. That doesn't mean I hate the people, though, but I'm just saying that's a true statement.
Is it? I mean, I guess I know the argument why people believe that and why what it is that the Jews believe different. I don't concern myself with that stuff. That's their the difference is that there's nothing in their version of Christianity that that contradicts American principles or values. Plain and simple. It's not the same thing as the Quran, where it justifies lying, killing, raping, and murdering non-believers. Yes, they think Jesus was I forget what they think Jesus was, a bad guy or a
false prophet
guy or whatever. Yeah, a false prophet. But fine, they can believe that. It doesn't really bother me. They still believe all the same tenets, basically. They do kind of believe in taking care of themselves first, which in an individualist society, there's not an issue with that. I do think that they should consider, if they are American, they consider themselves American, they live in America, then we're all Jews as far as they're concerned, I think. That's how it should be, rather than putting, Israeli Jews before any Americans that aren't Jewish. But that's more of a civil dispute than it is a religious one.
I will much rather take the Jews who just don't eat pork and some other things and kind of are a little silly over the guys that run into crowded places with bombs strapped to them, screaming Allah Akbar and killing in mass ways. But at the end of the day, he's pointing this out that obviously Stewie Vescent was a little anti-Semitic, but that's obviously common among Christians. You should obviously disagree with Judaism, but that doesn't mean that I just hate all the Jews and I believe that Jews shouldn't exist, but don't take me out of context just yet. I mean that they should conform to Christianity, not that we should go put them in ovens and stuff. So
I would hope not. Yeah, but I don't disagree as far as like what I personally believe, but I also believe that it is their, that's their prerogative. It is for them to come to Christ, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same for Muslims too, to be clear. I'm not, I don't have a problem. I wouldn't have a problem living peacefully among Muslims if it wasn't a religious tenet of theirs that I can never trust them. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
If they were to do away with that religious tenet, that pretty much solves all the issues right there. The problem is they haven't, they don't, they won't. How do you live peacefully among people that it is literally their religious tenet to not live peacefully with you? Or to live peacefully with you until they have the ability not to, basically.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. I mean, it's like...
Did you have anything else highlighted? Because I didn't have anything until the Franklin quote at the end. I know I had some Jefferson stuff in here, but...
On the eve of the revolution, answering a call from the Continental Congress for prayer, Sharif Israel asked the Lord to protect the colonies. O Lord, the God of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, may it please thee to put in the heart of the sovereign Lord, George III, and in the hearts of his counselors, princes, and servants, to turn away from their fierce wrath from against North America. It was not to be. The freedom of any and all to pray as Sharif Israel did in the manner and to the deity one pleased or to no deity was a crucial concern during the revolutionary period. America had been undertaken for many things, including the glory of God, but whose God and what kind of God was so weak he needed the authorities of the colony of Virginia or Massachusetts or of Connecticut or of any other to prop him up. It is air alone which needs the support of government, Jefferson said. The truth can stand by itself, and Franklin agreed. Go ahead.
When a religion is good, I conceive that it will support itself, and when it cannot support itself, and God does not take care to support it, so that its professors are obliged to call for help of the civil power, it is a sign, I apprehend, of it being a bad one.
That's how I feel.
Mm-hmm. That brings us into the final section of chapter 1. But yeah, I mean, he kind of points out that the Jews came and there was some, what am I trying to say here? A little bit of resistance to that. I mean, especially since we talked about earlier in the chapter about laws that were made in adherence to Christianity in some parts of this early America, British colonies.
Yeah.
So, but there were obviously, I mean, he then went on to talk about how that, what do you say? The superiors at the Dutch West India Company disagreed directing him to allow the settlers to travel, trade, live, and remain in the colony, provided that they don't become a burden to the colony. So,
Right. Well, as we get into...
So I guess we're moving... Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, as we get into... Is this the final section?
Yeah, final section. About 2 pages.
We, of course, start off... Yep. We, of course, start off with a quote from Jefferson.
Yep. And the title is Faith, Reason, and John Locke.
Jefferson wrote in 1776, "We have no right to prejudice another in his civil enjoyments because he is of another church. If any man err from the right way, it is his own misfortune, no injury to thee. On the contrary, according to the spirit of the gospel, charity, bounty, and liberality is due to him." That probably summarizes my beliefs better than, as far as my beliefs regarding others' beliefs, more so than I've ever put into as effective words. And I also believe that is what is supposed to be America's tenet on the thing. And I do think that a lot of conservatives today take it a lot farther than that in a way that they shouldn't.
Yeah. I like that one. He starts to kind of talk about how Jefferson was inspired by John Locke, who was an English Christian philosopher and politician who published a letter concerning toleration in 1689, a document that, along with others of Locke's works, helped fuel the rise of American vision of religious liberty, a vision to be enshrined in the Bill of Rights a century later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he continues to say, his words were essential pieces of Enlightenment political philosophy, arguing for the centrality of human reason, the natural rights of life, liberty, and prosperity, and the idea that the authority of the state should be derived from the consent of the governed.
Mm-hmm. And so we have to kind of remember that he is kind of explaining here to us that a lot of the laws that came to be in America were inspired by Christian authors and basically the commentators of the time, just ministers and people who published works and books and letters and writings. So I do find that interesting that he kind of points that out.
What I'm interested to find in this book going forward, because I haven't found too much utility to what we've learned so far. And the reason is, this is all kind of well understood by people today, that this is a Christian nation founded under a Christian God, but not necessarily under a specific denomination. What I would like to know is how the founders viewed non-Christian religions, such as the natives' beliefs, for example. What was their tolerance or intolerance for that? What was the belief as far as bringing them into... was it possible to bring them into a Christian society without, asking them to adopt that Christian faith or not? One could argue that maybe they didn't believe that, since that's not what we did. We found a way to live peacefully with them, but in separate societies, essentially. I mean, that's what reservations are, sovereign nations.
Mm-hmm.
Although, of course, we later, incorporated them. They are American citizens now, but still with the sovereignty of their reservation. That came much later. That came in the 21st century. Or the 20th century, sorry.
Yeah, of course, he spends the majority of this ending of the chapter in this section of the chapter talking about Locke. For him, reason, which he called That faculty whereby man is supposed to be distinguished from beasts proved the existence of an all-powerful, all-knowing God. Following Aristotle, Locke wrote that man knows he himself exists at least as much as he knows anything. I kind of like that from a philosophy standpoint. Then he moves on in the next paragraph. In the Lockean scheme of things, as in the pagan philosophers from Aristotle to Cicero, the majesty of creation and the marvels of man's own capacity for understanding lead to God. Revelation, the often miraculous accounts of God's interventions in history, is crucial, but for Locke, revelation cannot trump reason. Nothing that is contrary to and inconsistent with the clear and self-evident dictates of reason has a right to be urged or assented to as a matter of faith. And really this ending here, I have a lot highlighted, so I mean,
I don't have anything till a little further down. Basically, in those paragraphs, he's illustrating John Locke's working out of reason and religion, and using reason to come to the idea that there is a God, that and that you can be a religious person and still be a man of enlightenment, for lack of a better way to put it.
I kind of like the way he portrays Locke, but then he says here on the second paragraph of page 62, for Locke, toleration was both a religious and political virtue. I disagree with that entirely. Toleration is not a Christian virtue.
I guess it depends on what
you're not made to tolerate the we're not meant to be doormats. We're not meant to, just because, treat others as you would want to be treated does not just mean letting people get away with whatever they want. That doesn't mean if someone breaks into my house, I'm just supposed to say, hey, take what you want,
Well, there is a difference, and to give Meacham the best or the most grace here, there is a difference between tolerating others' beliefs, even if you believe them to be wrong, versus tolerating evil. We're not meant to tolerate evil, but we are meant to tolerate other people, even if we believe they are wrong.
Yeah. So long as they're not treading on me.
As long as they're
part,
white.
I won't tread on them.
Oh no, not that. Okay. I highlighted.
And further down. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, musing amid the Revolution, Jefferson drew a distinction between Britain's America and the very new United States. I doubt whether the people of this country would suffer an execution for heresy or a 3 years imprisonment for non-comprehending the mysteries of the Trinity. But is the spirit of the people an infallible, a permanent resilience? No, Jefferson answered, it was not. History teaches us that, quote, the spirit of the times may alter and will alter. Our rulers will become corrupt, our people careless. Best then to make the most of moments... I
underlined that specifically. That's a pretty good one.
Absolutely. Best then to make the most of moments like the American Revolution, moments when precious things can be provisionally secured against ambition and avarice. It can never be too often repeated that that the time for fixing every essential right on a legal basis is when our rulers are honest and ourselves united. Such a time was at hand.
That's a pretty good closing to chapter 1.
Yeah, it is.
You bet. But yeah, guys, before we continue on, let's not forget, let us know what you think of this book so far in the comments. Chris has an email you can send things to. You can find me on X, MillerTalk_pod. Send me direct messages.
The email is jbu@usa.com.
Yep.
And you can find the show, x.com/JBU_show. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. You can find all of that
It's on
over
the
there.
screen.
So,
Well, it's on the screen for my viewers. You don't care about your viewers as much.
yeah, I told you right after I finished this chapter, it was kind of a boring one. I feel like the introduction was a little better, but I think a lot was explained here. But like you said, I mean, it's not like we're learning any groundbreaking insights. A lot of this is stuff that you and me kind of both know already. But I think he's making an interesting argument. And so I've already started chapter 2, and I will say it is a lot less boring. So don't forget to tune into that, hopefully next Sunday.
That is the plan. We might need, we'll talk about it after the show. I'll stop playing with things.
But we got through it, and I mean, I think that last section was the most engaging, him talking about John Locke.
Yeah, probably
But
so. I
of
would,
course, he hits on Jefferson a lot.
yeah.
I'm wondering if continuing through this whole thing, he's going to continue to hit on Jefferson, or where he might end up going. But
I don't know. I started off this chapter quite frustrated with the quotes he was pulling and the examples that I felt he was cherry picking, but I do think he brought it back to a pretty reasonable place that I ultimately agree with. So, I mean, that's a sign of a good writer. It's still too early to say,
yeah,
but it is a good sign.
I particularly disagreed with the slavery part, but
yeah, the slavery and
for the most part, I mean,
Indian part.
I mean, I felt like that was a little cherry picking. Like, hey, look what these Christians did in this instance and stuff, and not really giving the full story of it. But, I mean, that part about Anne Hutchinson, you know, that kind of ties into the Indian part of it, was a little misleading. But, yeah, he did kind of come back to a more reasonable take, talking about John Locke and how Jefferson was inspired by him in ways. So chapter 2 is going to be fun.
Yep, it definitely will be. I also, too, I want to re-highlight that last quote I read from Jefferson because I think it is extremely timely. It can never be too often repeated that the time for fixing every essential right on a legal basis is when our rulers are honest and ourselves united. It's that reason that, and not to speak for Austin, but I'm going to, that Austin and I and people that tend to think like we do, it's for exactly that reason that we go back to the founding for a lot of this guidance on politics today. Because it was the last time that I can point to and definitively say our rulers were honest. And that the people were pretty well united too. I mean, we've certainly had times when we were united since then, but did we have an honest ruler at the time? I don't know. And even if we had an honest president, for example, that doesn't mean our entire government was honest. And the farther we get away from an honest government, the more crucial the principles that we set this government upon, the limitations that we set on them, the rights that we secured for ourselves, the more important those become. I don't think we can overstate. You know, I've said it literally a million times, but I don't think I can overstate the fact that the answers for today's political problems are all in learning our history.
Yeah.
To that note, I will mention again that I'm compiling a file, and that's what I was going to ask you to remind me after the show. I need to get Grok to put a list together for me of basically every founding document, every writing by a founder, anything that I can find pertaining to the founding of the United States. I'm trying to put together in a single file that you can download, so that you can print it off and read it, or read it on an ebook or whatever, however you want to do it. I'm trying to put them all in one place because they're in many places. So as soon as I do that, I'll let you know. But follow the x.com/JBU_show. I'll be sharing it there once I have it. That way, if you want to read Declaration and speeches and the Constitution, obviously, the what's it called, papers, the
Federalist
Papers, John Locke and George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. If you want to read the actual words, because everybody bastardizes what they said today. Everybody cherry picks. You have to read them themselves. And so hopefully there's some utility to putting them all in one place. But nonetheless, I got to get Grok to put together
looks
a
like
list,
chapter
there's
2.
just so many. Sorry, go ahead.
Looks like chapter 2 is the longest chapter of the book. It looks like it's about twice as long as the first chapter. So that may either end up being a longer episode or a part 2, especially as much as I've gone through it. I think there's a lot to say in chapter 2 already, and I don't think I'm even halfway through it. So actually, I'm just through the first section. So, and the first section is what, like 5 pages or something. So
it's a bit
much longer, or no. I'm through the first 2 sections. The first section's basically just the opening, but the actual first section, is about 5 or 6 pages long. So there's gonna be a lot to say. Look forward to that. You'll find me live on Twitch, Rumble, YouTube, and X. And I'm pretty sure Chris is the same, but I'm under Miller Talk. MillerTalk_pod on X, MillerTalk.substack.com if you want to listen to this episode later in audio format. I will be trying to post those again. So, Chris, what you got?
What am I supposed to have?
Any plugs, anything?
X.com/.
You working on anything besides your, the thing you just mentioned?
Not at the moment. Go back and check out the episode we did very recently on the thing that is so important to me that I can't remember offhand.
Yeah, I love when I have things that important to talk
The
about.
Douglas social credit system. When we spoke with Dr. Oliver Haydorn, there was
yes, he was a very fun interview.
A great interview. He explained a lot. I feel bad that I didn't promote the show in the way that I normally would for unrelated reasons. But go back and check that interview out. It was a great show. And the Douglas social credit system is it's not social credit like China has. It is a very interesting economic system rather than a individual system of like compliance. It's an economic system that is certainly worth knowing. I still don't know that I'm convinced by it, but it is a fascinating idea nonetheless. And I haven't heard anybody else talk about it either. So
go check it out, everybody. It was fun.
Oh, I should probably say where that is. Rumble.com/user/JustBetweenUs. You can also just search Just Between Us on Rumble. You'll find it.
And links to the Discord under Chris's Rumble posts. You can come join us and talk with us. Obviously, if you're just tuning in for this book review, we also talk about the news and other things. Like he said, we interviewed a guy about the Douglas credit system and everything. So lots of other things going on. I, of course, have writings on my Substack too, and there's a wealth of content for you to ingest if you so feel. And this is a viewer-supported podcast, so don't forget you can subscribe to my Substack for $5 a month or $45 a year
If you want us,
so feel.
if you like the show and you want us to keep doing it, you got to, because it takes a lot of time. You want me to play the
And
outro?
don't forget to tell your
Is that
mom
what you're
about
waiting
me.
on? Are you waiting on us to play the outro?
Yeah, for the most part, I'm done.
All right. Well, with that, my name is Chris,
And I'm Austin.
and this has been the Miller Talk JBU show. And fuck that goddamn sea lion.
I just got the Studio One recording. Still live though.
Bye, 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 bye. Wait, I can want to be a little bit louder.
Yeah.
This is only between us.
This is just between us.
This is between us.
Perfect. 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 Perfect.